It's Evelyn here from the camera store. Today we're going to be talking about the Nikon ZF. This is their full frame 24 megapixels, 8 stops of image stabilization, retro inspired body with a lot of cool features. Nikon has actually packed some new technology on it that we haven't seen before, and so we're very excited about this camera. I love the tactile controls. I love those dials. So Chris Niccolls and Jordan Drake from Petapixel are going to join me today, and we're going to chat about some of their first impressions, and then soon we'll have our first impressions review. So make sure that you're subscribed, you hit the notification bell so you can get that video. And then for now, I'm going to connect with Chris to hear what he has to say. So let me just get my headphones on here. Okay. Hi, Chris.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me on the show.
Last night, Nikon just announced the Nikon ZF. Not the ZFC, the Nikon for Chris, but maybe one that
Yes.
could be a little bit better for you, because this is the camera that you actually were asking for.
Yeah, I mean, the ZFC, I did push Nikon very hard to create, and the world should be thankful that I did, because it's here.
It's all
and
you.
now the ZF, I mean, it was all me. And of course, the question then when it came out is, when's the full frame version going to be coming out?
Yeah.
So the wait's over, it's here, but it's actually a very interesting camera, and I think it's quite different than what the ZFC was trying to do.
So of course the big question, is it like the ZFC in that it was basically just like a reskinned Z50? Or is this just like the Nikon Z6 Mark II? Or is this like an entirely different camera?
Yeah, so that's the very strange thing about it, right? Is the Z50, the ZFC, I mean, they basically share the same internals, and everybody thought, oh, maybe this is like a Z6 III, right? This is their retro version, but it's actually an interesting test bed for a lot of technology that we haven't seen, either that we haven't seen before or that we certainly haven't seen from Nikon before.
Right. So what was the most interesting feature for you when you first got your hands on it in terms of the technology that it offered?
So in all honesty, the most interesting feature for me was actually on the selector switch for video and photo. There's also a black and white mode. So
Nice.
the dumbest setting, that was my favorite, because I could just quickly go right to black and white. I love that. I mean, I actually used it a lot, but I know that's not like a technological advancement. So if I was going to say then what was the next big thing? I mean, there's a lot to talk about. They really did a lot of things. So certainly the new VR system we could talk about. I mean, that's quite interesting. The VR system, it's a little convoluted, so why don't we get through it? I mean, the VR system's updated. It's now 8 stops, which is actually very, very strong. But it does a cool thing. It actually, most vibration reduction systems, they can rotate on many different axes. They can go up and down and left and right, and they can rotate. And most will rotate, but they'll rotate the sensor always with the center being the axis that it's rotating on. And that doesn't do much good if your subject's off center. So if you've got a subject off center, you can actually set the focus point there and link the VR to the focus point, and that'll actually rotate the sensor for that subject, and that's really cool. Now, to be honest, this works mostly with wide-angle lenses. It's not that useful for telephoto lenses, so it's really more of a wide-angle thing, and unfortunately, it only works in stills, not video. Video, you still get great VR. You just don't get this fixed to the focus point, but I could see it awesome for like street photography with wide-angle lenses where your subjects, you want them rule of thirds or maybe even more extreme, and it's just going to give you extra stability specific to where you're focusing.
Yeah, well, and 8 stops in its own volition is pretty impressive. I mean, we're seeing this in 2023. This is like the feature checkbox that we're seeing a lot of cameras get to.
Yeah.
And yeah, having this neat, unique feature is kind of cool as well. Now, does it only work on ZF lenses, or could you put like adapted f-mount lenses?
No, it only seems to work with the actual mirrorless ZF lenses, autofocusing lenses. And if you go to telephoto, it's then going to instead use, like if you've got a telephoto lens that already has VR in it, it's going to use the dual VR like it did before. And it's still very expensive. Expensive? No. It's still very excellent. It's like 7.5 stops.
Nice.
It's not that expensive.
All right, now when it comes to the physical feel of this camera, I mean, this is what it's all about. It's kind of that same idea of having like a Fujifilm X series cameras. I love the tangible dials on that. So if you were to compare it loosely to a Fujifilm camera, do you find like the experience is the same idea? Was there any differences there for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I really loved, first off, the ZFC when it first came out. I mean, for me, the FE cameras, the FM cameras, Nikon's vintage cameras from the late 70s, early 80s, those are still my favorite SLR designs of all time. So when the ZFC came out, I really love that because it basically followed the form factor almost exactly. I mean, same size, weight. I love the fact that the body actually had no grip on it on the ZFC. Like it just was very reminiscent, and it triggered all my nostalgia, and so it really brought me back. So that I really had a more visceral experience with, a more like emotional experience with. The ZF though, I was worried because when it first came out, I'm like, I hope they don't just make like what the Nikon DF was, you know, the
Right,
DF SLR, where it was basically, you know, the outward look was retro, but really the camera functionality was not good in my opinion. I really didn't like it at all. So I was actually happy to see the ZF had very functional design, very similar to a ZFC. It is larger physically. It does have a bit of a grip on it. You can get a larger grip if you want. That's optional. But as far as control goes, especially the black and white mode I talked about, but also just the mode dials, everything felt very nice, very much like what I was expecting to have in a full-frame ZFC. Compared to a Fuji, yeah, I mean, I find the ZF's got a lot of customizability. The experience of being able to shoot either way, like being able to do vintage mode dials, shutter dials, you know, aperture on the lenses, that kind of stuff is great. But I do like the ZF's got nice command dials. You can do it kind of in more of an old-fashioned way, I guess, or
And you
more
have
modern
that
way now.
the little f-stop number too, right, on the top of the camera? Just
Yeah,
like you had on the
you know, and that's
ZFC?
right off from the ZFC. So yeah, I mean, it handled exactly how I'd want it to handle if I want to have that classic vintage experience. And if I want to go a bit more modern SLR, not necessarily adjust things with switch dials, I can use command dials with my finger and thumb. That was really cool.
So there is 2 card slots on this camera, but
Yes.
we have a teeny one and a bigger one. So we have the full UHS 2 memory card slot, and then as a backup, you have a micro SD card, like those little cards that go into like GoPros, or some people have them in their phones too. What's your thoughts on this direction?
Yeah, so I don't think it's going to necessarily win over a lot of pro photographers. You know, it's legitimately people who are working where the photography is a job, you know, like weddings, journalism, and you cannot afford to have any failures, or at least try to mitigate as many as possible. Dual card makes a lot of sense, right? Being able to have that dual backup where you shoot photos and it goes to either card, or, you know, just have the extra capacity. So I think a lot of people are going to kind of read this and be turned off, and I get it. But at the same time, it's important to understand that, you know, as long as you're okay with UHS-2 SD card speeds, which are fine for this camera, micro SD, you can buy them the same speed. You know, I know a lot of people probably get cheaper, slower ones because they're just putting them in action cams and stuff, but you can get really capable micro SD cards. And so as far as logistically for backup speed, for, you know, being able to shoot to both cards simultaneously, I don't think you're going to have a disadvantage there. Now, yes, admittedly, you know, having to carry 2 different card sizes is a bit of a pain. Micro SD are absolutely very easy to lose. Don't ask me how I know. So I get that a lot of people are going to be turned off. But if you're okay with the dual slots being different sizes, as far as capability goes, it's not going to be like cameras where you have a CF Express card and an SD slot, and you have different capabilities depending on which card you're using. So I do like that. I think that was a nice step in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, it's better than just having one, right? It gives you that option, and it still keeps the camera relatively compact. I mean, if they added a whole nother full-size SD card slot, they would have had to add size to the camera.
Yeah, I think a lot of casual users will just use it where they, you know, use the SD card as their main camera, and main media slot, and then you could just put a micro SD card in there and forget about it. And just totally forget about it. And then if you're ever grab the camera and you run out the door and you're like, oh, I didn't bring my SD card, it's there as a backup, right? Or if you're traveling and you're shooting a whole bunch, you don't have access to download, and you just fill up that one card, you've got that backup. So yeah, I think in that regard, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine, everybody. It's going to be okay.
Another cool little control that's an homage to vintage cameras is the threaded shutter. So you're able to actually use like an old school release cable. Did you try that out?
Absolutely. I mean, that's, I didn't, but that's cute. Absolutely. I mean, I always like that. I feel like a lot more cameras should have that, only because the threaded cable releases are so easy to use and they're affordable and stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's a nice nod to the vintage roots of this camera. Cute little addition. Absolutely.
Did you find like the experience in the interface was a little bit better on this camera than previous models?
Yeah, the screen is nice on the back. I mean, I like the way that it articulates. I know it doesn't tilt, and a lot of photographers like that sort of vertical tilt without having to pull the screen out. I'm not bothered by that too much personally, but what I really like to see was the return of the autofocusing control with the touch screen. So as far as a handling standpoint goes, you know, I like autofocusing joysticks as much as the next person. I think a dedicated joystick is always a great idea, being able to move your focusing point around with your thumb. But with limited space on the back of the camera, I think this is a great compromise. If you don't have space for the autofocus joystick, which the ZF does not have, by the way, if that wasn't clear. So yeah, I like being able to then put my thumb on the actual LCD panel. I can set what area will be sensitive and what part won't, and then I can move the autofocus point around with the touch panel. And it was very responsive, very intuitive. I suppose if you're wearing gloves or something that didn't have the touch pads, that would be an issue, but I tend to hibernate for the winter anyway, so I don't want to do that. I'm not going to worry about it.
No gloves for you.
No gloves for me. No, just stay indoors. But the autofocusing control worked actually very well using the touch panel, and that's something that, like, when they took it away on their SLRs, I was like, why did you take it away? It's such a great feature. And so finally, it's all me. I've just been complaining to Nikon for so many years. They're finally like, just please shut Chris up and put this back in the camera, and they did.
And then autofocus performance, I mean, you don't have the joystick, but you have a lot of the deep learning modes that we're seeing in like the Z8, Z9. Maybe not exactly the same level of processing power, but we're seeing a lot of those same algorithms, right, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the autofocusing experience was nice. The Z8, the subject detection, Nikon's probably one of the only companies where auto subject detection actually works reliably. So you don't even necessarily need to switch specifically between animals or people and stuff. I still do, just because I have trust issues, but it actually worked it worked really well. And yeah, portraits are great. Nikon's eye detect has gotten so much better. We didn't really have a chance to try it with wildlife, but knowing the Z8 algorithms, its wildlife is fantastic. There was no problems there. And of course, they've added motorsports. So if you want to do motorsports, you got that too. So at least for what we were doing, the tracking, 3D tracking, that's so big, right? I mean, one of the main downsides with the Z6, Z7, in my opinion, was that they took away the 3D tracking interface. And on top of that, the tracking didn't work that well. Like, frankly, I'm sorry, but it doesn't. So the new 3D tracking that we've seen now in the Z8 and Z9, it's very effective, it's very easy to implement, and it's here, so I was really happy to see that.
Did you see any performance lag issues compared to, say, the Nikon Z8 in your early testing? I mean, I know it was pre-production that you guys had your hands on.
Yeah, no, not really. I mean, the autofocus seemed to work very well. Again, it is pre-production, so, that's always a thing, but it worked very well. And I found on top of that, like, the burst rates are good, 14 frames per second, mechanical shooting. You can go fast with electronic. I probably wouldn't, and that's just because, you always have issues with the rolling shutter on this sensor. It is the same sensor as the Z6 II, so it's nice detail. It's just not that fast,
right?
A readout, so I would avoid it. I mean, 14 frames per second is plenty for me.
I know. Like,
so... Yeah.
It's kind of crazy. I mean, if you think about back to DSLRs, I mean, whenever we're saying like, oh, it's not that fast, because we're hitting such high level specs in a lot of cameras right now, mechanical shutter, 14 frames per second is plenty for capturing sports action, wild children, whatever you have.
I mean, the ZF body, like I said, is obviously a different design, right? And it's really aimed, I think, far more at street photographers, casual shooters, travel, that kind of stuff. It's not that you couldn't use it with the long lenses. I think it would actually shoot wildlife perfectly fine, right? It's just, it's not going to have quite the grip. I definitely want to get the small rig optional grip if I was going to do something like that. I would definitely want to... maybe have more weight, but it's just not going to have, it's just not made for that. So you could absolutely use longer lenses. They might not balance or feel as comfortable to use here, but for street photography, I think this would be way faster than you would need in pretty much any situation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I'm very jealous that you guys got your hands on it, but it's a pretty camera. We're certainly looking forward to testing it as well. But was there anything else that you didn't say in your review that you wanted to touch on?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I did say it in the review, but I guess really the thing is, it's just neat that Nikon added so many things here. I mean, we've got Nikon's first multi-shot compilation. It's still kind of basic. You have to do everything through the NX software, and you have to use a tripod. But it's nice that we're having that now. We've seen that in so many other brands. I was super impressed by how well it autofocused in like near darkness. That was wild, minus 10 EV. at f1.2.
And you guys
Full. That
were
was
at
wild.
Pin Bar?
Yeah, we went to
that
Pin
place is
Bar,
so great.
and it's so dark in there, right? And it had no issue. Like, not only did it focus, but it focused quite quickly. And it's dark in there. We're talking like lights from arcade machines is almost it.
Yeah, yeah.
So
But it's supposed
I
to
was
be
really impressed by
-10,
that.
-10 EV.
Yeah, -10 EV.
That's
So
crazy.
really, really good. And then I did bring my AI glass, my old manual focus vintage glass, and that worked really well. I like that I can still get eye detection. Obviously, it's manual focus, but I get eye detection where when I do punch in, it goes right to the person's eye, which is where I
That's
want
cool.
it anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're doing a lot of these things, you know, and you still have the IBIS and stuff. So we're doing these things where it's just making the experience nice and easy to use. But I just was amazed how much they put into this. You know, I guess the thing is, I don't think this is a replacement for the Z6 II. I think this is something where we're going to probably see a Z6 III eventually. It's going to have a lot of the same technology, I would assume. But it's just interesting that the test bed for a lot of this new stuff happens to be this particular camera, which is, you know, arguably a very niche camera.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, thanks so much. I'm going to grab Jordan. I'm going to get him to come up here and talk a little bit about some of the video stuff on this guy. But thanks so much for taking some time and chatting.
I hope you get to play with one soon. But yeah, my pleasure to be on the show.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I know it's a little squishy. Oh, okay. Yeah, there we go. Lovely. Graceful.
Very professional.
And you're already mic'd up. Look at that.
Also professional.
Always prepared. You never know, right?
Yeah.
When you're going to hop on TCS TV.
Why am I here?
You're here to talk to me about video on the Nikon ZF.
You can take these off.
Oh, yeah, I can take these off.
Chris is gone. Hey.
Chris is gone, yes.
Yeah, I have some definite thoughts, and I think it's really interesting.
You have some thinky thoughts?
I have thinky thoughts, because I thought it would just be like a Z6 II,
Yeah.
you know, which was kind of like their photo video hybrid camera.
Okay, well, let me ask you this then. Yeah. So as far as compelling video features go, we know that it's loaded physically. Like we have the headphone jack, microphone jack, fully articulating screen.
Yeah.
It can shoot 4K 60.
But with a crop.
With a crop, yeah, we'll talk about that. But what do you think is the most compelling video feature or video advancement in this camera?
I mean, I think the big thing is, like, I love the Z8, Z9. Those are some of my favorite hybrid bodies. And then all of those features that I loved for video have been kind of brought down to this. You know, everything that doesn't require that stacked sensor. So, you know, I'm getting like that 3D tracking I love so much, waveforms. It's the first 10-bit camera that they've released without going up to like that 4,000, like the professional price level, where you're getting 10-bit internal, log internal before you used to have to record to an external recorder, which is kind of cumbersome. So yeah, I mean, there's not a ton of new stuff on the video side. There's more on the photo side. But if you haven't used a Z8 and Z9, and a lot of people haven't, they're very expensive cameras, then this is like a huge video upgrade over the Z6 II.
Yeah, and then with that 8 stops of image stabilization, you don't have to do as many of your like video lenses.
My little
You can
crab
be
walk.
like a little bit more loosey-goosey.
I want to be loosey-goosey when I'm filming. That's
Yeah.
great. Yeah, that is a really nice update on it. I mean, the big thing for me is it's kind of an odd body to be such a good hybrid camera, you know? Like, they have the fully articulating screen for the first time in Nikon full frame, so if you're filming yourself, that's great.
Yeah.
It's just like, as a video shooter, I'm not constantly changing my shutter speed and my ISO, so that's 2 dedicated dials right there.
Yeah.
Like, I'd almost prefer a classic DSLR style body like the Z6 II, and it's weird they didn't announce at the same time, like
2 options.
here's the ZF if you want that kind of vintagey look, and then here's the Z6 II if you're looking for a more traditional one. So I'm of 2 minds. Like, if you're a photographer and you like that design, then this is a killer video camera.
Yeah. Are you concerned at all about the micro SD card as a backup for video?
Not really. I mean, it's UHS 1, so you might not be able to record the absolute highest data rates, but the Nikons are like super efficient. So I do feel like, you know, you'll still be able to record 4K to it. I don't believe it has redundant backup when you're shooting video. So if you need that, that could be a problem, but again, that's a fairly niche thing, and if you need it, then you can move up to a more advanced model.
Cool. So definitely a photographer's kind of idyllic camera. That would be really exciting, but you can shoot some awesome video and it's well equipped for it. Yes?
Absolutely, yeah. Especially at the price, it's a really great option.
It's a good deal, you guys.
Yeah, totally.
Well, thanks so much for joining me really quickly. I know you're super busy right now. It's been kind of a crazy week. You got the iPhones, you got the
crazy
all
season.
the stuff.
Yeah.
But really, really appreciate it, Jordan.
I love being here. Thanks for having me. having me on your show.
Yeah, and you know what? Later, I'm going to listen to your podcast that's coming out today as well. I've been listening to your podcasts on Spotify, but you can watch them on YouTube.
That's so much Jordan. That's too much
I get
Jordan
a lot
in your
of
life.
Jordan in my life. It's great. But yeah, check out their podcast. They're writing some articles. Chris has an article out on the ZF as well, so definitely check that out. And yeah, Petapixel. Thanks so much for watching, guys. And big thanks to Petapixel and Jordan and Chris for sharing their first impressions and, of course, some of their coverage as well, so you guys can see what this camera looks like. It's pretty gorgeous. And I want to know what you think about it. What are your thoughts on the moves that Nikon has done? Some of the new technology, we have that multi-shot mode, we have the dual card slots, one being a micro SD card. What are your thoughts on some of these things? Do you like the retro design? Let me know in the comments below. We love hearing from you guys. And make sure that you are subscribed, you hit the notification bell so we can catch you again very soon.
Okay, I'm gonna try and dismount here.
Okay, oh my gosh, okay.
No, hang on.
Oh my god.
Ah.
Okay, we could have found a better spot. I just wanted the David Attenborough, but anyways, thanks, Jordan.
Welcome.
Love you.
Love you too.